Here is a question that might genuinely surprise you. What if one of the biggest hidden risks to your pancreas isn't something you're eating for the first time, but something you've already eaten, put in the fridge, and quietly reheated dozens of times without a second thought? Pancreatic cancer is one of the most quietly devastating diseases on the planet. According to the American Cancer Society, the 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer sits at just around 13%. 13%. That means for the vast majority of people diagnosed, by the time they receive that news, the window for effective treatment is already critically narrow. And one of the cruelest facts about this disease is that it rarely announces itself early. It grows silently, and it is deeply influenced by the long-term habits we build in our own kitchens. Now, here is the thing that most people don't realize. Oncology researchers, food scientists, and nutrition epidemiologists have spent decades studying how specific foods, especially when they are cooked or reheated using high heat, can generate chemical compounds that are directly linked to increased cancer risk, including risk to the pancreas. These aren't fringe theories. They are findings published in peer-reviewed journals and acknowledged by organizations like the National Cancer Institute, the World Health Organization, and the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So today we are going to walk through 5 specific reheated foods that scientific research has connected to elevated cancer risk, explain the biological mechanisms behind why this happens, and give you clear, practical steps you can take right now to reduce your exposure. This is not about fear. This is about understanding your body and your kitchen better than you ever have before. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to look at your weekly meal routine in an entirely new light. Before we dive in, I want to be absolutely clear about something important. Everything we discuss today is for educational purposes only. This video is based on published scientific research, but it is not a substitute for personalized medical advice. If you have concerns about your pancreatic health, a family history of pancreatic cancer, or any digestive symptoms that worry you, please speak with your doctor or a qualified healthcare professional. Nothing in this video should cause you to stop, change, or delay any medical treatment you are currently receiving. We are here to inform and empower, not to diagnose or prescribe. Now, with that said, let's get into the science. Let's start by understanding what the pancreas actually does, because most people honestly don't think about it until something goes wrong. Think of your pancreas like a quiet but absolutely essential factory tucked behind your stomach. It has 2 major jobs. First, it produces digestive enzymes, the chemical workers that break down the fats, proteins, and carbohydrates in your food so your body can absorb them. Second, it produces hormones, most notably insulin and glucagon, which regulate your blood sugar. Without a healthy pancreas, your entire metabolic system begins to struggle. Now, cancer develops when cells within the pancreas begin to grow and multiply in a disorderly, uncontrolled way. Over time, this forms tumors that can interfere with the organ's function, and, in advanced stages, spread to surrounding tissue and other parts of the body. The reason pancreatic cancer is so dangerous is precisely because the pancreas sits deep inside the abdominal cavity, surrounded by other organs. Symptoms often don't appear until the disease has already progressed significantly. By then, the options become much more limited. So what makes cells in the pancreas begin to mutate and grow out of control in the first place? The answer involves something called DNA damage. Every cell in your body contains DNA, the instruction manual that tells the cell how to grow, divide, and function normally. When certain toxic compounds enter your body through food, they can interact with your DNA and alter those instructions. These changes, especially when they accumulate over years and decades, can begin the process of turning healthy cells into cancerous ones. This is exactly where diet becomes a critical piece of the puzzle. Certain foods, particularly when they are cooked at very high temperatures or reheated repeatedly, generate specific classes of chemical compounds that have been shown in multiple studies to be mutagenic, meaning they can cause exactly this kind of DNA damage. And the pancreas, because of its central role in processing what you eat and managing the metabolic consequences of your diet, is particularly vulnerable to these long-term dietary insults. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know what country you're watching from and whether you regularly reheat leftovers as part of your weekly routine. Your responses genuinely help this channel reach more people who need this information, and I read every single comment. All right, let's count them down, starting from number 5 and building to the one with the strongest and most direct scientific connection to pancreatic cancer specifically. This one surprises a lot of people because spinach is genuinely one of the most nutritious foods on Earth. It is loaded with iron, folate, magnesium, and antioxidants. So why is it on this list? The issue isn't the spinach itself. The issue is what happens to the naturally occurring nitrates in spinach and in other leafy greens like Swiss chard, kale, and beet greens when they are exposed to heat multiple times. Nitrates are completely harmless compounds that are naturally present in many vegetables, but under heat, and particularly with the help of certain bacteria that multiply if cooked vegetables are left at room temperature for extended periods, those harmless nitrates can be progressively converted into nitrites. And nitrites, especially when they interact with proteins in food or in your digestive system, can form a family of compounds called nitrosamines. The European Food Safety Authority, in its 2023 risk assessment of N-nitrosamines in food, identified a positive association between preformed nitrosamines, specifically a compound called NDMA, and increased cancer risk. Now, to be fair and scientifically honest, the evidence here is more nuanced than with the other foods on this list. Reheating spinach once, promptly after it has been properly refrigerated, is generally considered safe by most food safety authorities. The concern arises primarily when cooked spinach is left at room temperature for several hours before being reheated, or when it is reheated multiple times. That's when the bacterial conversion of nitrates accelerates, and when the formation of potentially harmful compounds becomes more significant. The practical takeaway is this: if you cook spinach or other leafy greens, don't leave them sitting on the counter. Refrigerate them promptly, and ideally eat them fresh or only reheat them once gently and at a lower temperature. The goal is to minimize the number of heat cycles these foods go through. Number 4, reheated high-starch foods, especially potatoes. Here is one that might genuinely make you reconsider your next batch of reheated roasted potatoes, fried chips, or day-old bread that gets toasted again. The chemical at the center of this concern is called acrylamide. Acrylamide is a compound that forms naturally when foods that are rich in starch and contain a specific amino acid called asparagine are cooked at high temperatures, particularly temperatures above 250 degrees Fahrenheit or around 120 degrees Celsius. This process is part of what is known as the Maillard reaction, the same beautiful chemistry that gives bread its golden crust and roasted potatoes their appealing brown color. But while that browning creates wonderful flavor, it also creates acrylamide. According to the National Cancer Institute's dedicated fact sheet on this topic, acrylamide has been shown to cause cancer in animal studies at high doses. In those studies, it caused tumors in multiple organs. The picture in human populations is still being studied and is considered less definitive, but the FDA, the NCI, and the UK's Food Standards Agency have all acknowledged that acrylamide in the diet could contribute to lifetime cancer risk. The Food Standards Agency in the United Kingdom specifically advises people to cook starchy foods to a golden yellow color rather than a deep brown or black, precisely to reduce acrylamide exposure. Now here is where reheating becomes a particular concern. When you cook potatoes the first time and they develop that golden color, some acrylamide has already formed. But when you take those leftover potatoes, chips, or home fries and reheat them in a hot oven or a pan at high temperature, you are essentially running that Maillard reaction a second time. The food gets darker, the crust gets crispier, and the acrylamide content increases further. Research published in scientific literature has confirmed that reheating at high power, whether in a conventional oven at high temperature or in a microwave at full power, can significantly increase acrylamide formation compared to the initial cooking. The practical solution isn't to never eat potatoes. It's to be mindful of how you reheat them. Opt for lower temperatures. Reheat only until warm, rather than aiming for extra crispiness, and avoid burning or heavily browning starchy foods. A golden color is your visual guideline for staying in a safer range. Number 3. Foods cooked in repeatedly reheated cooking oil. This one is slightly different from the others because the danger isn't primarily in reheating the food itself on your plate. It's in cooking or frying food in oil that has already been used and reheated multiple times. Think of the deep fryers at restaurants, fast food outlets, or even at home when someone reuses the same pan of oil day after day. When cooking oil is heated to frying temperatures and then cooled and reheated repeatedly, a series of chemical changes occur that fundamentally alter the nature of that oil. A study published in the Journal of the National Center for Biotechnology Information found that repeatedly heated vegetable oils develop significantly increased levels of trans fatty acids and oxidized lipids, fats that have essentially been damaged by the repeated heat exposure. The same research found that long-term consumption of thermally oxidized oils impaired liver function and triggered significant oxidative stress and lipid peroxidation throughout the body. What does oxidative stress mean in plain language? Think of it this way. Every cell in your body is like a small building. Oxidative stress is like having a slow, persistent fire burning inside those buildings. Over time, the structural damage accumulates, the machinery inside the cells starts to malfunction, and the conditions become favorable for cancer development. The pancreas, being a gland that is deeply involved in fat metabolism through its digestive enzymes, is directly exposed to the products of oxidized fats in your diet. A study examining the connection between dietary fatty acids and pancreatic cancer risk, published through the NIH AARP Diet and Health Study and featured in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute, found that intake of saturated fats, particularly from repeated high-heat sources like meats and overused cooking oils, was associated with increased pancreatic cancer risk. The practical recommendation is clear and manageable. Don't reuse cooking oil for deep frying more than once or twice. If oil has become dark, has developed a rancid smell, or is visibly smoking at lower temperatures than it used to, discard it. For everyday cooking, use fresh oil in moderate quantities and favor lower temperature cooking methods where possible. Number 2. Reheated processed meats, bacon, sausages, deli meats, and hot dogs. This is where the scientific evidence becomes very hard to ignore. In 2015, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer, the global gold standard for cancer risk classification, made a headline-generating announcement. They classified processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen. Group 1 means there is sufficient evidence in humans that consumption of the substance causes cancer. For perspective, tobacco smoking and asbestos are also in this group. Red meat was placed in Group 2A, meaning it is probably carcinogenic to humans. The evidence for this classification came from reviewing over 800 studies. The mechanisms identified included the presence of N-nitroso compounds and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that form during the smoking and curing processes used to make these products. Now here is the critical part as it relates to reheating. Many of these processed meats already contain added nitrites as preservatives. When you take bacon, sausages, smoked deli meats, or hot dogs and apply additional high heat, frying, grilling, or pan-searing them a second time, you are triggering additional chemical reactions between those preserved nitrites and the proteins in the meat. This generates more of the nitrosamines we discussed earlier, those particularly concerning compounds that have been linked to cancer in a variety of organs, including the digestive system. A study conducted at the University of Hawaii found that regular consumption of processed meats was associated with a 67% increase in pancreatic cancer risk compared to those who consumed little to none. While this was one study and findings must always be considered in the broader context of the scientific literature, it aligns with the broader IARC consensus and multiple supporting studies. The pancreatic risk from processed meats is not only about nitrosamines. Processed meats are also typically high in saturated fat, and the high-temperature reheating of their fat content can trigger the same oxidized lipid problems we discussed in food number 3. It is essentially a double-hit scenario. The practical guidance here is not to live in fear of eating bacon twice in your life. It is about frequency and preparation method. If processed meats are a regular part of your weekly diet and you are reheating them repeatedly at high temperatures, the cumulative exposure over months and years begins to matter. Reducing the frequency, choosing lower temperature reheating methods, and balancing your diet with plenty of fresh fruits, vegetables, and whole grains can meaningfully support your long-term pancreatic health. Number 1. Reheated well-done and charred red meat. And now we arrive at the food with the most direct, most robustly studied, most peer-reviewed connection to pancreatic cancer specifically, and that is red meat, particularly beef, pork, and lamb, that was cooked to a well-done or charred state the first time and is then reheated. Here is the science, and it is genuinely fascinating once you understand the mechanism. When muscle meat is exposed to very high cooking temperatures, especially above 300 degrees Fahrenheit, as happens in grilling, pan-frying, or barbecuing, a series of chemical reactions occurs between the amino acids, sugars, and creatine naturally present in that meat. These reactions generate a class of compounds called heterocyclic amines, or HCAs, and a related class called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. HCAs are not found in any significant amount in vegetables or plant foods. They are essentially a product of cooking muscle meat at high heat, and they are mutagens, compounds that the National Cancer Institute describes as capable of causing changes in DNA that may increase the risk of cancer. The most compelling evidence linking this specifically to the pancreas comes from a landmark prospective cohort study conducted within the prostate, lung, colorectal, and ovarian cancer screening trial, involving over 62,000 participants followed for a median of 10 years. Published in the journal Molecular Carcinogenesis and supported by the National Cancer Institute, the researchers found that people in the highest quintile of HCA exposure from cooked meats had hazard ratios for pancreatic cancer of approximately 1.87 compared to those in the lowest quintile. In everyday language, those with the highest HCA exposure had nearly double the risk of developing pancreatic cancer compared to those with the lowest exposure. The upward trends in risk were statistically significant and dose-dependent, meaning the more HCA exposure, the greater the risk. Additional research published in Cancer Epidemiology, Biomarkers, and Prevention confirmed that meat and meat mutagen intake were associated with pancreatic cancer risk in the NIH AARP cohort. An earlier population-based case control study from the Upper Midwest found elevated odds ratios of up to 2.4 times greater risk in those with the highest overall meat mutagen exposure. Now, why does reheating specifically matter for this food? Because when you take a piece of well-done grilled steak or a burger that was cooked until charred, put it in the refrigerator, and then reheat it the next day in a hot pan or under a high broiler, you are putting that already HCA-heavy meat through a second round of high-temperature exposure. The surface of the meat that was already darkened gets exposed to intense heat again. Additional HCAs can form on that surface. Additional PAHs can develop if there is any fat dripping. You have essentially compounded the initial exposure. The NCI's own guidance on this topic specifically recommends against reheating cooked meats under high-temperature conditions. They suggest using a microwave rather than a grill or pan to finish reheating, as microwave reheating does not generate the surface temperatures required for new HCA formation. Now let's talk about who needs to be especially careful with this information, because not everyone faces the same level of risk. People with a family history of pancreatic cancer have an elevated baseline risk, and for them, every dietary modification that reduces cumulative exposure to known carcinogens is particularly meaningful. If you have a first-degree relative who had pancreatic cancer, please bring up these dietary considerations specifically with your doctor or a registered dietitian who specializes in oncology nutrition. People who have already been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes should also be aware that diabetes is itself an established risk factor for pancreatic cancer. Managing blood sugar through diet is therefore doubly important, both for diabetes management and for cancer risk reduction. If you are pregnant, your primary dietary concern around these foods is food safety rather than carcinogen exposure, since you will naturally be limiting many processed and high-temperature cooked foods anyway. But the general guidance to reduce well-done charred meats, reused oils, and excessive processed meat intake applies broadly. For people currently undergoing cancer treatment of any kind, please do not use this video as a basis to make dramatic dietary changes without consulting your oncology team first. Cancer treatment is a complex medical process, and nutritional changes should always be coordinated with your healthcare providers. Finally, this information is not designed to cause panic in anyone who has regularly eaten these foods for years. Cancer risk is cumulative and multifactorial. Diet is one piece of a larger puzzle that also includes genetics, physical activity, smoking history, alcohol consumption, and other factors. The goal here is to give you one more powerful piece of knowledge that you can act on starting today. So what does actually changing your habits look like in a real kitchen, in a real week of your real life? Let me walk you through it practically. When it comes to reheating meat, the single most protective change you can make is to switch from using a high-heat pan or broiler to using a microwave or a low-temperature oven for reheating purposes. The NCI specifically recommends the microwave as a safer option because it heats food through moisture and internal thermal energy rather than through direct surface heat, which means HCAs do not form during the reheating process. If you do choose to reheat meat in a pan, use the lowest heat setting necessary to reach a safe internal temperature and avoid recharring or darkening the surface. For processed meats like bacon and sausages, consider reducing the frequency with which these appear in your diet rather than eliminating them with dramatic all-or-nothing pressure. Research consistently shows that it is long-term, habitual, high-frequency consumption that correlates with elevated risk. Having bacon once or twice a month is a very different picture physiologically than having it several times per week. When it comes to starchy foods, your visual guide is color. The UK Food Standards Agency's recommendation is elegant in its simplicity. Aim for golden yellow, not brown or black. Reheat potatoes, bread, and rice-based dishes at lower temperatures and never reheat them until they are darker than they were when originally cooked. For cooking oils, a practical habit change is to dedicate a single use of oil for deep or high heat frying and then discard it rather than saving it for the next day. For everyday sautéing, use small, fresh amounts of oil with each meal. Oils high in monounsaturated fats, like extra virgin olive oil, are more chemically stable at moderate cooking temperatures than many refined seed oils, making them a smarter choice for daily use. For your leafy greens, the key habit is prompt refrigeration. As soon as cooked spinach, kale, or Swiss chard has cooled enough to handle, transfer it to an airtight container and refrigerate it immediately. Reheat it only once and only gently. When you do reheat it, you are not trying to recook it. You are simply bringing it back up to a comfortable eating temperature. As for realistic expectations, dietary changes around cancer risk reduction are not something you will feel overnight. This is long-term preventive biology. Think of it like compound interest. Small, consistent adjustments made over months and years accumulate into meaningful changes in your lifetime risk profile. Oncology nutrition researchers consistently observe that individuals who make sustained dietary modifications report not only reduced cancer risk over time, but also improvements in energy, digestion, inflammation markers, and metabolic health within weeks to months of making those changes. Let's bring this all together, because the most important thing I want you to walk away with today is not fear, it is agency. Your kitchen is a place where you have real, genuine control over your health trajectory. The 5 foods we covered today: reheated, charred, and well-done red meat, processed meats reheated at high temperatures, foods cooked in repeatedly heated oils, high-starch foods like potatoes that are rebrowned and re-crisped, and nitrate-rich vegetables like spinach that are reheated multiple times, all share a common thread. The danger is not in the food in its original, fresh state. The danger accumulates when certain cooking and reheating practices generate chemical compounds that, over a lifetime of regular exposure, can meaningfully increase the burden of oxidative stress and DNA damage to which your pancreas and other organs are exposed. The science behind this is not sensationalism. It comes from the National Cancer Institute, from peer-reviewed journals like Molecular Carcinogenesis and Cancer Epidemiology Biomarkers and Prevention, from the World Health Organization's own IARC classification, and from decades of large-scale epidemiological studies involving hundreds of thousands of participants. This is the same scientific consensus that shapes dietary recommendations from the American Cancer Society, the World Cancer Research Fund, and leading cancer research institutions worldwide. You don't have to overhaul your entire life today. Start with one change this week. Maybe it's reheating tonight's leftover chicken in the microwave instead of the cast iron pan. Maybe it's committing to fresh cooking oil for next week's stir-fry. Maybe it's watching the color of your roasted potatoes a little more carefully tomorrow. Small, consistent changes, that is where the real power lives. And please, if anything in this video prompted a question, a concern, or a thought about your own health, make an appointment with your doctor. Talk to them about your dietary habits, your family history, and any symptoms you've been quietly ignoring. Pancreatic cancer is most manageable when detected as early as possible, and being proactive about your health is the single most powerful thing you can do. If this video gave you something useful today, please give it a like. Every like helps this channel's algorithm place this science-backed content in front of people who need it most. Subscribe if you haven't already, because every week we bring you the same level of research-backed, evidence-grounded health content. No hype, no miracle cures, just science you can actually use. And share this with someone you care about, because the best gift you can give the people in your life is the knowledge to protect their health. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Take care of your pancreas, take care of yourself,